and she began to socially transition him after that. You know, kids can be deceived on these serious matters. They can make mistakes about who they are or what they want to be, especially at young ages. James only presents as a girl when he's with his mom. When he's with me, he presents as a boy. Nevertheless, the courts gave her sole control over psychological and medical decision-making. And that allowed her to push him into the medical side of transition. After one appointment, one-hour appointment with a pediatrician and a psychologist, my son was referred to a gender clinic to, quote, and this is in the medical records, explore the medical side of treatments. What is the medical side of treatment? It's chemical castration by puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones starting at age 8. It permanently sterilizes the child, and it causes a myriad of health problems. Of the children that go on to this protocol, almost all of them go on to surgical transition. So they were looking to put my son onto a path to surgical transition as early as age 8. I fought a long battle in court, a very expensive battle, and I was able to get half decision-making for medical and psychological, and that allowed me to stop him. I narrowly stopped him in December of last year from being chemically castrated in a gender clinic. At that transgender clinic in Dallas, the Genesis Clinic, they referred over 200 total mastectomies of girls, surgeries of girls, total mastectomies. Over 100 castrations of boys. It's a big problem. It's not just my son, and I always remind myself of that. It's about thousands of children, not just James. I want you to consider that it's illegal in Texas for children to get tattoos. It's illegal for children to smoke. It's illegal for parents to give children cigarettes to smoke. But we're allowing children to make irreversible decisions about their biology, about removing healthy sexual organs. And I want to tell you just how far off some in the psychological community have gone. We asked an expert witness at trial how she could medically justify removing healthy body parts from a child. And she said, well, if they're causing psychological distress, they're not healthy body parts, and we can remove them. And that's the principle by which these psychologists are acting. But it went much further than that. For most of my son's life, I have been unable to teach him that he's a boy. I have been unable to use male pronouns. I have been unable to present him as a boy to third parties. And I have been unable to teach him traditional Christian doctrine on sexuality and gender. Courts are actually doing that to parents. I'm not saying that the government knows better than doctors. I'm just saying when it comes to irreversible treatments, treatments that you can never go back on, we should delay doing these drastic procedures until children can make informed decisions when they're 18. We have to have a law. Not because we want to interfere in family decisions or in personal decisions, but because it's very clear that schools, government agencies, courts, and the psychological board of examiners are not going to do the right thing there. Let me give you an example. My son is still, even though I have a court order today that says my son is a boy by gender, a male by sex, and his legal name is James Damon Younger, the Capella Independent School District continues to call him by a girl's name, continues to use female pronouns, allow him to use the female bathroom, and still teaches him that a girl. When I took him to school as a boy, the teacher gave him a dress look. The schools and the government agencies and the family courts especially need legislative guidance, and we need Steve Toth's bill, HB 98. 68, sorry.
Yes. Tracy Shannon, thank you so much for being here. Tracy's going to share with you her experience with this issue. Thank you so much.
Good to see you again.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm Tracy Shannon. I'm the Texas Director for Mass Resistance, and I'm a trans widow. You may not have heard that word before. A trans widow is a woman whose husband left them to transition into being presenting as the opposite sex. You may not have heard of that before because we're treated like we do not exist. The victims of this harmful ideology are hardly ever heard from. My first glimpse of this movement and this harmful ideology came when I went to see a therapist for what I presume to be marriage counseling to help me and my former husband with resolving the issue of his cross-dressing. I was told that because I do not accept the cross-dressing, or that I didn't accept the cross-dressing, that I was closed-minded. I was also told by this therapist who specializes in gender therapy that I'm a lesbian. I met with this therapist for just a few minutes before she made that assertion. And she said that's so because I married someone who had an inner feminine side to them. The same therapist wrote a letter for my then husband to start his transition behind my back, and he went on to take hormones and grow breast, and I was unaware of him taking the hormones. So that was my first, for 11 years I didn't know he was taking it. So that was my first experience with this movement. Now this therapist has written a book to help parents, to tell them how to support and affirm their children as they transition. She at least acknowledges the grief that the parents go through mourning the loss of their children. My second glimpse into this harmful ideology came when I went to family court. In family court, we fought daily over what pronouns would be used. And this was more than 10 years ago before Bruce Jenner became Caitlyn Jenner. And my kids were ordered by the court into therapy not to help them with the trauma that they were experiencing or with the loss that they were experiencing in the process of grief, but to help them to affirm their father in his transition and to tell them that they could no longer call their father dad any longer. Again, the ideology was put above the needs of the children and what was best for the children. Now, I have watched in horror for many years as this ideology permeates every institution in our country. All sectors of society, military, medical, psychological and corporate, academic, entertainment, and even our public schools now. Children are bombarded 24/7, 365 days a year with gender ideology. Drag queen story time takes place in libraries and even in our public schools. The ideology of promoting transgenderism is put above the safeguarding of children in some cases. In some cases, we found that the drag queens that were held out as role models to these children, some of these children, LGBTQ identifying children, the role models, the drag queens, ended up being sex offenders, prostitutes, porn stars, and dominatrix for hire. I don't think these are suitable role models for any children, but what kind of ally are you? And how much do you care for these children if you will not safeguard them and you assume that drag queens are a role model for them? Children are told, be who you are, while given the nod to mimic the opposite sex and dress, and by medically and chemically, the process of medical and physical impersonation of the opposite sex. Trans ideology is introduced as early as kindergarten to our children, yes, even in Texas. Children in schools are being fed unscientific and dishonest information, such as born in the wrong body, or having a girl brain in a male body. We must stop the harms that comes to children confused by this indoctrination. Puberty is not a disease. Stop putting gender non-conforming kids in an unnatural state with chemicals. Most children will outgrow dysphoria if they are not pigeonholed by this ideology. House Bill 60 Representative Toth's bill strikes at the heart of this issue by designating transitioning of minors as what it is, child abuse. Currently, CPS, family courts, the medical establishment all endorse and promote the industrial scale child abuse of children. It must stop. Thank you.
David? David, pick up.
I'm gonna film David.
Good afternoon, I'm David Pickup. I'm a licensed emotions and therapist, psychotherapist. I currently operate the largest private practice in Texas for those clients, either children or adults, who have unwanted sexual or gender issues. I have several gender dysphoric clients in my practice. Having said that, being a psychotherapist, I find myself a little bit in an unusual situation because right now I'm here in a political sense to support absolutely Bill HB 68. I got the bill right, didn't I?
That's okay.
And I find myself a little bit in an unusual situation because therapists are supposed to be these mild-mannered, got-all-together kind of guys, right? Well, I am over time. However, currently, today, I'm enraged. And I'm in sadness because I'll just tell it like it is, because sometimes tell it like it is therapy is what's needed. If legislatures across the aisles do not pass this bill, they will, in my opinion, be complicit in the abuse of Texas children. That's the bottom line. How do I know that? Because every single thing that psychologists and psychotherapists and the APAs of this world are telling people, parents and children, about inborn gender dysphoria, or there is such a thing as a man being born in a woman's body and vice versa, it is not based on one conclusive research study that has ever been produced in the last 10, 20 years. Not one. Think about the implications of that. Healthy body parts, penises, breasts, they're being removed because a bunch of scientists who claim science have authored their beliefs on something, a belief system that doesn't exist from a scientific standpoint even. And that's kind of my specialty this morning. They have no proof. They are obligated by the standards of good, healthy science and frankly, common sense to treat our children in exactly the way that allows them to grow and one day even make their decisions for themselves. That's why this bill is so absolutely essential for passage. If legislatures, and this is regardless of party, we don't care about party in this moment. This is about Texas children. Can you imagine the children who come to my office who are 9, 10, 15, turning 18? See, I'm the person who sees all the underlying trauma of transgender issues. I'm the person who sees all the causal traumas of early childhood in these issues. Those issues that are being largely ignored by the mainstream psychological communities. They have no right to harm children. I don't care if it's unintentional. Unintentional abuse is still abuse. This bill is about love. It's not about taking away something from somebody. It's not about disrespecting those who believe that for them they are truly transgender. They should be handled with grace and truth, but in my opinion, they deeply need compassion combined with truth, because there really is no compassion. There is really no health if it's not based on truth. So I ask the legislators to report on what the truth is and to live the truth and to demonstrate the truth regardless of who criticizes them or who tears them down or who threatens to take money away from their campaigns or who threatens to take votes away. You have to do the right thing, ladies and gentlemen. The time has come. We have to tell the truth and be also compassionate to those individuals, even those psychologists who disagree with us. I handle cases in my office every day with children who come in. Most of them are children who have seen the light, so to speak, of truth. And they don't want their issues. And I'm telling you that the media is not telling the general public that dysphoria is resolved, is resolvable. It's happening in my office on a weekly basis because I have some of these clients. They know they've been traumatized, maybe better informed than other people, and they resolve these issues. It's a lot of hard work because there's a lot of abuse involved that gets shoved under the rug. So, also, these folks aren't telling you about what the science really says. Did you know, for instance, that anyone can go to Google right now and Google this information, and you'll find out that about 85 to 90% of people with gender dysphoria resolve those issues anyway by the time they're in their late 20s. But the media isn't telling them that. Why? We need to respect truth and love. If you understand this and you're willing to do the hard work, which this bill represents, you'll do it because you love Texas children, all children, including the transgender children who need our help desperately. And this is just one of the things that is a must do. So I implore the legislators to support this bill.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Jessica Fields, and I'm Director of Advocacy for the Texas Freedom Coalition. We advocate for constitutional government and profile family values in the state of Texas. We are here in support of Representative Toth's bill, HB 68, and I'd like to begin by giving you a little bit of my professional background. After leaving the military in 2009, I earned a bachelor's degree in gerontology and a master's of science in health and wellness psychology. My expertise is human development across the lifespan, meaning from birth until the time of death. These days we hear a lot about the science. Well, I want to remind everyone that science is funded, and therefore we have to follow the money. Many people, such as the Pritzker family and George Soros, and others, including pharmaceutical companies and the U.S. government, are sending millions of dollars to transgender causes. Overall reported global spending on the transgender industry is now estimated at several billion dollars. From 2003 to 2013, reported funding for transgender issues increased more than 8-fold, growing at 3-fold in the increase of LGBTQ funding overall, which quadrupled from 2003 to 2012. This huge spike in funding happened at the same time that transgenderism began gaining traction in American culture. Several billion dollars is a lot of money. It is enough money to change laws, to create a new language and force new speech on the public. There are now new pronouns, and if you dare to take a stand against using them, you are almost tyrannically assaulted. It's enough money to censor and to create an atmosphere of threat for those who do not comply with gender identity ideology. How did it happen so fast? And that's what many of us keep wondering. There is a complete saturation of the media, government policy, school systems, psychology, and medicine with unwavering promotion of the notion that anyone, including children, can change sex with or without medical transition. Even Planned Parenthood has also recently decided to get into the transgender medical market. I want you to remember that transitioning individuals are medical patients for life. Puberty blockers are yet another growing market, yet studies show that 100% of children who use puberty blockers will go on to use cross-sex hormones, leaving them permanently sterile. And now there are vast corporate interest in the medicalization of gender non-conforming children. It has grown at a shocking pace in a few years, and there are more children's gender clinics now than there are adult gender clinics, because that's where the money is. The first gender clinic for children opened in Boston in 2007, and in the past years, more than 30 clinics for children with purported gender dysphoria have arisen in the United States alone, with the largest serving 725 patients. This all happened in a small period of time. Could it be because children are more easily persuaded? Children aim to please and can be easily manipulated. Dare I even ask if this is the reason why they are being targeted? As a gerontologist and a psychologist, I can assure you that at the young age of 8 years old, the frontal lobe is not developed and is not ready to assess the decision to permanently change their own human body. A child does not understand the consequences of permanency. The frontal lobe is actually not developed until the late 20s, which marks the cognitive maturity associated with adulthood. This is something simple that all doctors, therapists, gerontologists, and psychologists learn in school. It's what I learned within the first year. It's not news. So this tells me that science is being ignored in order for profits to be gained by the transgender industry. For example, most scientists and doctors know about the horrific effects of the drug Lupron. Lupron is used for hormone-associated therapy and sex hormone suppression. The Endocrine Society has recommended starting hormone therapies such as Lupron. Lupron is an off-label, untested, experimental use drug. It has not been through any FDA approval process, and yet it is being pushed by the pharmaceutical industry. Children who are given Lupron are many times later diagnosed with degenerative disc disease, fibromyalgia, brittle bones, osteoporosis, and faulty joints because of the accelerated aging caused by Lupron. Parents are told that the puberty-blocking drugs and cross-sex hormones may be the only way to prevent their children from committing suicide. But on the other hand, those who have had sex reassignment surgeries have a 19-fold risk of completing suicide. The science and the statistics are not being followed. This is unacceptable, and this never should have been allowed to reach the point that it has come to. The medical industry complex is driving the epidemic of the diagnosis of gender dysphoria. It is funded and culturally driven by the medical industrial complex. This is being done in plain sight. We do not allow many things to be marketed to children. We banned Spuds McKenzie because the dog drew children's interest to a brand of beer. Yet we are here 30 years later, and children are being sold the lie of long body in children's books, in story times in libraries, in classrooms, in children's programmings, social media influencers, Hollywood, advertisers, and video games. This is the largest medical scandal in the history of the world involving children. It is a reincarnation of Joseph Mengele, only at this time it is out in the open, and there are multiple industries profiting from the industrial scale of child abuse. Representative Toth's bill is the only bill introduced in the nation that does strike at the heart of this matter, calling gender transition of minors of any kind, medical, surgical, or social, what it really is, and that's abuse. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jill Glover, and for over 30 years, I have been licensed as a marriage and family therapist and a licensed professional counselor. I will say that much like Dr. Pickup, I'm astounded, I'm horrified at the changes in my field, at the things that we are seeing being perpetrated on children. It has been completely normal sorts of practice for counselors to see little boys and girls who may present with differing kinds of personalities for their sex. We used to call that being a tomboy. We have little boys who would present as more creative. And that is absolutely normal and aligned along the line of the spectrum of what it means to be male and female. In the past 2 years, this whole new industry, honestly, it's an industry, has sprung up to profit off of children. And it is abusive and it is horrifying. I hadn't heard of Mr. Younger until just a couple of years ago. And frankly, the first time I heard his story, I didn't believe it. I thought there is no way that there could be people in my field, much less medical doctors, who would actually go along with wanting to transition a little child, especially under the age of 8, and I think he was around 5 at the time. There is no possible way. As I did research and explored the issue more, I found out not only is it happening, but it is happening across the state of Texas in numbers higher than I would have ever guessed. We have got over 500 children that we know of in a hospital treatment program undergoing social transition and hormonal transition. one of the current arguments is that if we do not affirm children in transitioning, as the previous speaker mentioned, that they will experience greater depression and perhaps even suicidal ideation. There is absolutely no research to prove that, and what we really suspect is that underneath there's other unresolved psychological issues that need to be addressed. And one reason we have such a high suspicion of that is even after surgical transition, we are still seeing these folks having higher incidences of suicide and emotional problems. And so we know that there's something else going on, and we in fact suspect that probably because of medical transition, that is contributing to higher distress. So it's actually contributing to more problems than it purports to solve. The thing that I love about House Bill 68 is that it gives children an opportunity to grow up. We know that brains do not finish developing for some until the mid-20s, 24, 25 for males. And my goodness, can you imagine doing surgery on a 14-year-old male to remove genitals, and then that same young man turning 24, 25, and realizing he is permanently scarred and affected for life and will not be able to have any kind of meaningful physical relationship, much less be able to have children. It is horrific. It must be stopped. It is a product of our times. And I'll be perfectly honest, as a counselor, we didn't see this kind of thing until the advent of the internet and some of the changes that have been coming out of the entertainment industry and things coming out of sexual ed curriculum. And combination of those changes, I believe, has led to, frankly, what looks to me like social contagion and a fad, but it's a fad that is doing horrific damage to children in Texas and across the United States. And so I want to thank Representative Toad for his courage, for his commitment to children and to families. And I so urge people to contact the representative and her senator. You can find out who represents you by just Googling who represents me and find that online. And you can send an email or make a phone call to your representative or senator. And I urge you to do that. And I thank you very much.
Hi everybody, my name is Lily Kate. I'm 19 years old. I grew up homeschooled in the Woodlands, Texas, and I'm a speech debate national champion and a social media influencer and spent a lot of time in LA. And I'm here today to support this bill because I firsthand seen the destruction of transgenderism, specifically for people who are young. And so I want to talk about first how this bill literally will protect children from life-altering decisions made by themselves, their parents, or doctors that will have lifelong consequences that they at that time are not able to even conceive of those consequences. And it will add to the definition of child abuse, which is something that we urgently need. And will add to the definition of surgeries and procedures that are harmful and irreversible. And I do want to say, for everybody who's watching online or on TV, this will not deal with transgender adults how they wish to make that decision with their own bodies. This is specifically dealing with children. And it's dealing with dark stories that are tainting our experimental medicine with a dark streak that cannot be erased. So what I find really interesting, actually, when I was doing a little bit of research on this is the Obama administration actually agrees with this sentiment. And in 2016, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services revisited the question of whether sex reassignment surgery should be covered by Medicare plans. Despite having received requests of its coverage that they want it to be mandated, the administration actually refused on the grounds that there was a lack of evidence that it was actually beneficial. So although their statement was about taxpayers and healthcare receivers, which are typically older people, I would argue that the proposition, if it would have been about a child, their answer would have been the same, if not more overtly, a no. Because Michelle Obama spent a lot of time reading to children Dr. Seuss books that are now canceled, so I would say that she'd be in favor of this. So they also put out a statement regarding the thought process. Quote, based on evidence, on thorough review of clinical evidence available at this time, there is not enough evidence to determine whether gender reassignment surgery improves the health outcome for Medicare beneficiaries with gender dysphoria. So another example of someone who is doing this is actually the UK. And I know a lot of people here don't like them, and yes, we declared independence from them a while ago, but maybe we can learn something from them because, quote, in a stunning decision with international implication, the United Kingdom's High Court ruled on December 12, 2020, in a court decision that puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones used in gender dysphoria minors as experimental should not be given to children under 16 without a court order. They later added that 17 years old was also within that bracket. And they clarified that the consent of this issue was not in the depth of information that minors were given, but that, quote, there is no age appropriate with an appropriate way to explain to many of these children what losing their fertility or full sexual function may mean to them in later years. That adolescents find it difficult to contemplate and comprehend what their life will be like as adults, and they do not always consider the long-term consequences of these actions in it. And perhaps as obvious as this statement is, there's a growing necessity for the obvious and common sense in our society. But I also like to say that statistics are really on our side for this one. According to heritage.org and the book that's now been also banned from Amazon, When Harry Became Sally, trans people are all more likely to commit suicide in adulthood from early transitioning. And we have plenty of stories to back this up. Fortunately, I don't have time to tell them today, but there are lots of them. So more than 1 in 4, so 27% of trans young people have attempted to commit suicide, and 9 in 10, so 89% have thought about committing suicide. 72% have self-harmed at least once after early transitioning. So John Brooks, after extensive study on if children grow out of gender confusion, said, actually this is to build off a point that was made earlier, for decades to follow up, studies of transgender kids have shown that a substantial majority, anywhere from 65 to 94%, eventually cease to identify as transgender. If that's not something we should give the benefit of the doubt to, then I don't really know what is. So 94% of these suffering children can be set straight and will be set straight by their natural biology that has been given to them by our Lord and Creator. But right now, in a culture, more broadly speaking, we are encouraging kids to get sex changes, and we say it's good for them, and we're always going to wait until they commit suicide to ask ourselves, maybe this wasn't such a good idea to push through our legislation. And I can tell you that this is not something my generation wants to stand for. Our society has no room for experiments that end in suicide, depression, or regret. This should never be considered okay on the basis of empowerment, liberation, and freedom. Protecting our children has to be a nonpartisan issue. And our government, especially from my favorite and the best state of them all, Texas, has no room for legalized child abuse. What kind of society stands for that? So we must pass this bill before tragedy happens to our defenseless children, who are the same age as the children who are my little brothers and little sisters. I grew up in a family of 8. So yes, I'm what a lot of people dislike, but I have very young siblings and they're malleable. You can get them to do anything for you. Never would I want to manipulate them in that way. So here's my call to action. I see, actually, I'm surprised there's a lot of young Gen Zers in the room, which is really refreshing to see. But we stand resolved as young people who love our children and love our siblings that this bill has to be passed. I urge Generation Z to start thinking aside from their emotions for once, to put logic first, and to start protect people who are our age. And I want Gen Z to stand with me to fight against child abuse, to fight against indoctrination, nonsensical and non-consenting decisions. So I stand here and very proudly proclaim BLM, Babies' Lives Matter. Thank you.
Wow, that's amazing. Your parents did a good job. I want to recognize a couple of our state representatives that have been real thought leaders in this. I want to thank Representative Swanson. And Representative Swanson, what's your bill number?
House Bill 1485.
House Bill 1485. So this protects biological women in women's sports. It was 1968 when, I wasn't born in Texas. I got here as quick as I could. And proof in the pudding is that in 1968, my sister was a skier, downhill skier, and she was a world world-class athlete, and she couldn't ski. This was before Title IX. And so my dad had to sue Section 5 so that Patty could get onto the boys' ski team. We've worked so hard to create opportunity for women. We cannot go back on that. So I want to thank you for your bill.
Thank you.
Also want to thank Representative Asute. Are you still here? Thank you for your leadership on this. I saw Representative Biederman Slayton in here a little while ago, and especially I want to thank Representative Tan Parker. Tan has been such a leader in the Texas House all across the board of conservative issues. If you don't get leadership, if you don't get senior leadership to buy into the legislation and support it, it goes nowhere. So Tan, thank you, Representative, for your leadership.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're doing great.
Thanks. And I want to bring up Senator Hall now. He has a few words for us from the upper chamber.
Look at that debate.
No, very few. I tell you, if you haven't heard enough from all these good speakers here, from what Father Jeff Younger had to say, Dr. Pickup, and those others who spoke about this, then the words will never get to you if you haven't gotten an understanding of what we're doing. We do a lot of important things here in the legislature, and I can't think of anything that we have this session, including our budgeting and redistricting, which are very important, that's any more important than stepping up and protecting these innocent children. It's been called child abuse. There are no other words to describe what it is when you think about it. And the problem we have is that no one wants to think beyond the veil of, isn't that cute, the little boy in the dress, or the girl. They're not thinking beyond that. And what we have done with this is just imagine. I mean, I grew up, I can remember kids from elementary school. The boys were sissies. That's what we call them. They were not necessarily nice, but they were sissies. The girls were tomboys. By the time I got to high school, some of those sissies were some of the toughest football players I had to deal with. And those tomboys, big knockouts for homecoming queen. I mean, if they had lived now, who knows what it would have happened to them. And back to what I was saying about not, they did the veil of it. But when you get down to what are we talking about? We're talking about drugs that are irreversible. That no matter what happens later, that starts the process. It's irreversible. And then when you talk about, and this is what people don't want to hear about. I don't even like saying this kind of thing, but when you talk about cutting the penises and the testicles off of a boy, that's pretty drastic. Pretty doggone drastic. And we're talking about children. We're not talking about an adult who's made that decision for themselves. You've got a cadre of people who want this culture that we're in to do something different. And they're using children to do this. And with what they do to the girls, of cutting out their breast and then grafting on artificial penises, folks, that's what people need to hear about. I don't like talking about it, but people need to understand how horrific. This isn't something that's just cute. This isn't something that we just ought not to be doing. It's not like, what color tie you wear or what you wear on a particular day or you eat. This is radically changing children who have no choice. And as I think Jeff said, you can't even tattoo a child. You can't give them cigarettes. You can't give them alcohol. And I agree with that. But we're talking about cutting their body parts off and making a big deal about it, putting them on a pedestal for the parents. And that's probably one of the problems we have is the attitude of the parents of a boutique child. So as we move forward, Steve, you've got a great bill. Valerie has a good bill because the issue, I can't think, in sports, women have worked so hard. And where are the women stepping up? Where are the women? They're saying our sports is going to be taken away from us. What just happened in Utah? I think we got a Miss America contestant that's heading to the big contest in Atlantic City or wherever they're holding it now. It has absolutely no business being there. But we've got the facts out there. Was it the woman who holds the world's record, I believe, is in the 440 or 400 meter, I guess it is now. It's 440 when I ran track. It's 400 meters now. Is won that year after year after year, setting records. And we currently have over 300 high school boys that have a faster time than she has. So it is going to destroy women's sports. And I thank you, Valerie, for that bill. And thank goodness there are companions for these in the Senate. There are companions for these that several of us are working on. And one way or another, we hope we'll get it through there. But I can say I thank all of you. Thank you, Steve, for what you're doing. Jeff, I can't say enough about you for stepping up. We've been working this. Jeff and I, we tried last session. I had a bill in the Senate. I couldn't get a hearing on it last session. I hope it's going to be different this year. This is something, there is nothing bigger we're going to do this session than to protect these children. And thank all of you for doing this. Thank you.
At some point, government needs to make sense. But it doesn't make any sense when 2 years ago we told the people of Texas an 18-year-old isn't old enough, isn't mature enough to decide whether or not they should smoke. And so this chamber, the Senate chamber, came together and they said 18-year-olds are not smart enough to know whether or not they should buy cigarettes or not. We raised the smoking age from 18 to 21. And yet we're telling a 6-year-old that they can transition? I used to work for the Harris Poll. I'm not into anecdotal information. It drives my staff nuts because I always say, show me the study. Show me the research. I'm a junkie on it. I want to see empirical data. You've heard some of the most compelling empirical data today, and you'll hear more. And if you want more of it, we'll pour it on to you. We've got it. And if you want to provide it for any of your stories, we will give it to you. This is not some kind of Baptist or Christian or right-wing thing. This is empirical data. This is Plus One Sweden study. It's a peer-reviewed science journal that shows that within 11.4 years of transitioning for these adults, they start experiencing emotional distress and start spiraling down. That's reality. We know that the suicide rate is exponentially higher among these children as they become adults because they've done something that they cannot reverse. And you'll say, well, isn't that just because the United States is not accepting of these kids? Well, go over to the Scandinavian countries where it's widely accepted and encouraged. Their suicide rates are identical. We've got to protect these kids. This is about the children. This isn't a left-right issue. As you heard earlier, the Obama administration did not support this. We should not support this. The UK has heard all the arguments for and against and aside. The courts have said we should not accept this. Texas should not accept this. We've got to start standing for our children, loving them, caring for them, and fighting for them, and not fighting for political wokeness and correctness. And I hope you'll help us with it. God bless you. Thanks. So the different folks that you heard from today are going to stay here and be available for questioning. If you want to ask any questions, feel free, okay?